Hi, everyone. My name is Emi Nietfeld, and I'm the author of Acceptance. I'm so thrilled to be here today, especially because I have always been obsessed with college. When I was in elementary school, I dreamed of attending Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, which is basically the MIT for evangelicals. A little later, I set my sights on the University of Minnesota, which is the best school in the world because they invented the Honeycrisp apple. In high school, I dreamed about Columbia University in the city of New York, a bastion of culture and 24-hour libraries. And as a senior, I wanted to get into Harvard because it's Harvard. Little did I know that I would write my college essays while sleeping in my car. For the first 9 years of my life, my family was middle class. We lived in a suburb in Minnesota, my two parents, me, and my dog, Poochie. But then shortly after the dot-com bubble burst, my parents separated. This triggered pretty severe mental health issues in both of them. My dad started using substances. My mom began compulsively shopping. When I was 11, my mom won custody and my dad moved across the country. And this meant that I was living with my mom, who was devastated by the divorce. She was saddled in legal debt, and her purchases had been hoarded and piled up. So we lived in an apartment filled with waist-high piles of trash. Mice ran between the rooms, and our shower, the only usable shower, was filled with empty water bottles and dirty peanut butter jars that I wasn't allowed to throw away. My mom loved me more than anyone. She would tell anybody who would listen about her brilliant genius daughter. But she couldn't tell that there was a problem. And so instead, she brought me to the doctor, who quickly diagnosed me with ADD and prescribed stimulants. When that made me freak out, I got antidepressants and eventually antipsychotics. And by the time I was 14, I had been placed on 12 different psychiatric drugs in just under 2 years. My life began to feel totally hopeless. My dreams of college seemed more like delusions as I missed more and more school. And I started doing maladaptive things. I was cutting myself. I refused to eat. I abused leftover Adderall. And honestly, it seemed easier to die than to keep living in the squalor at my mom's house. When I was 14, I was sent to a locked residential treatment center, a place with bars over the windows and a padded isolation room. The punitive therapy there was more harm than good. But one afternoon, I got my hands on a copy of an ACT prep book. This felt like the best moment of my life in years, because when I sat down and I did these practice problems, I had control. And for the first time in so long, I could imagine a path out through college into a better future. After 9 months there, I was discharged, but my mom's house was unlivable. And so I was sent to a foster home way out in the middle of cornfields. It was really tough living with these randos, but I took a lot of solace in school and spent all the time that I could in the photo lab after class. Unfortunately, my foster parents felt like my academic ambitions were causing my misery. If you'd asked me, I would have told you that I was depressed from living with strangers who thought that Michelangelo's David was pornography. Strangers who would eventually kick me out. But with the help of my photo teacher, I got a scholarship to an arts boarding school for my junior and senior year. And this felt like my big break, my chance to apply to the type of university that I had dreamed about, where I would find intellectual companionship, my best friends, a place that I belonged, filled with nerdy bookworms who loved to study. But it was a lot of pressure, both to try to get into one of those schools, and then if I did, to pay for it. And I also didn't have a place to stay during breaks. So the summer before my senior year of high school, I couch surfed from friend's sofa to friend's sofa before eventually sleeping in my rusty 1992 Corolla. However, I knew the truth, which was that the biggest problem in my life was, how am I going to write my personal statement? I had hoped that just getting good grades and good test scores would be enough to get me into a college that could give me a full scholarship. But that summer, I learned that wasn't true. Instead, I had to prove myself to be an overcomer, somebody who was made stronger by all that I had endured. I had to show that I could take any tragedy and twist it into triumph. The only problem is that this was basically impossible. I had not really overcome any circumstances. I was still in the middle of them. How was I supposed to write an essay about growing from living at a homeless shelter while I was living at a homeless shelter? And I had to make all of these disclosures about my family that felt like betrayals, and hide mental health issues that, while understandable, were huge red flags. After I turned in my applications, I was plagued with nightmares where admissions officers would interrogate me, asking me why I had omitted things from my application, questioning me about why I had told lies to adults. They were demanding to know why I wasn't this perfect human interest story that we read about in newspapers. Then, on April 1st, 2010, right down the street from here at the Seattle Public Library, I opened my email and I had a note from Harvard. I clicked on it and it said, "Congratulations." I immediately started screaming, disrupting at least 200 patrons before I ran out of the building and into the rain and was screaming and dancing and laughing, convinced that my life was about to change forever. In my fantasies of this moment, I always imagined a literal helicopter appearing from the sky, coming down between the skyscrapers, throwing down the ladder, and whisking me off into my fancy new life. The truth was that I was still a vulnerable girl with greasy hair, no family support, and mired in my maladaptive coping mechanisms. When I got on campus, it was a huge culture shock. Everybody was wearing these hideous brown leather loafers. Someone told me they were called boat shoes because you wore them to sail. And people also kept talking about this thing called Martha's Vineyard, which I thought was Martha Stewart's wine company. Turns out it's just some vacation island. Like a lot of kids from difficult homes, I had a family. My mom emailed me all the time, sometimes asking for money. She showed up unannounced at campus, and I loved her so much, and she loved me. But this relationship was a source of stress, not support. I had hoped that I could just show up in the dorms, move in, and say bye-bye to my past. But I was still dealing with the aftermath of trauma, mental health issues, grappling with the consequences of sexual assault. And every day I was discovering new gaps in my education and, even worse, my social skills. I did everything I could to just shove it down and become a Harvard person. I wanted to be a girl who could make PowerPoints for fun and who could say bagel without a Minnesota accent. I was ashamed of my past, and I thought there was no way forward but to hide it. I did not realize that I was far from alone, both in my circumstances and in this feeling of embarrassment and shame. I had grown up with this ideal of resilience being pounded into me. Resilience is like the highest compliment that you can give someone in America today. It's praised by everyone from politicians to Peloton instructors. And I took it to mean that I should be able to just shut the door on everything I'd left behind and move on from my past, either being unaffected by it or ideally made much stronger. I didn't realize yet that that is completely unrealistic. We are all impacted by the things that happen to us. They shape our educations and our adulthood. And that's okay. It took understanding that to be able to come to peace with what happened to me and to be able to move forward on my own terms. I really, really struggled as a freshman at Harvard, but eventually I did find my place. I studied computer science and I walked onto the rowing team, two things that I really hadn't known existed before I came to campus. And when I graduated, I had a job at Google as a software engineer. And after work, I started writing acceptance. I still had a really long way to go to make sense of my background and to understand the systems like child welfare, mental health that had shaped my experience. But my education gave me the skills and the stability to do so. I wrote acceptance because I have always been inspired by books that are brutally honest, especially if they're also funny. I wanted to really describe what it's like to be a teenager in the new millennium without sugarcoating anything. And I wanted to write a book where candor could become its own form of optimism, because no matter how hard things are, we're still here. And man, I'm so glad that I'm no longer a teenager. Thank you so much.